Flight Attendant Slaps Old Man, not knowing he's a powerful US Senator. Welcome, dear viewers, to a tale brimming with high-stakes tension, breathtaking misfortune, and surprising revelations. On board an unassuming flight, a single moment of rashness, one impulsive, ill-fated slap sets in motion a storm of intrigue. When a flight attendant lashes out at an elderly passenger, she has no idea he holds the reins of one of the most influential offices in the country. But his power is only the first shocking secret the skies have in store. Prepare for heart-pounding twists, hidden agendas, and a shocking chain of karmic consequences no one will see coming. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. Terminal 6 at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport bustled with its usual chaos. Bright neon signs flashed overhead as travelers rushed in every direction, pulling suitcases and juggling tickets. The stale smell of burnt coffee beans mingled with the pungent aroma of travel anxiety. Among the swarm of passengers stood a seemingly frail old man, Charlie Tremblay, dressed in a modest navy blue suit with scuffed leather shoes. He blended in effortlessly, just another grey-haired traveller with posture slightly stooped, appearing neither formidable nor out of the ordinary. Olivia Masters, a veteran flight attendant for a major airline, had just begun her shift and was already feeling the tension of the jam-packed flight. She'd managed countless busy flights before, but there was something in the air that made every nerve tingle. Maybe it was the sudden thunderstorm forecast, or the backlog of frustrated travelers from the earlier flight cancellations. She didn't know. A strange sense of foreboding coiled in her gut, making her unusually short-tempered. When boarding began, Olivia hurried through the cabin, mechanically helping passengers stow their belongings. Forcing a smile through clenched teeth, the overhead bins were filling quickly. She caught sight of Charlie Tremblay trying to shove a small roller bag onto the overhead shelf. He moved with deliberate caution, as though he was wary of injuring himself or someone else. But with the rest of the bin space nearly gone, he had trouble fitting his suitcase. Olivia's eyes narrowed at the scenario. She'd seen half a dozen travelers fail to follow carry-on restrictions, and she was in no mood for another confrontation. Tense chords of irritability twanged in her chest. Olivia strode over in rapid steps, her authority on full display. "Sir, your bag is too large for this overhead bin," she snapped, though the bag was actually within regulation size. Charlie blinked, politely trying to explain that he had double-checked the measurements. But the flight attendant's mind was set. She was determined to enforce whatever rule she saw fit. Or perhaps she just needed someone to vent her pent-up frustration upon. All around them, other travelers paused to look on. A mother clutched her toddler closer, whispering to the wide-eyed child. A pair of college students, exchanging uncertain looks, froze in the aisle. The tension crackled like an exposed live wire. Charlie calmly attempted to diffuse the situation. "I believe the bag is regulation size, ma'am," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "But if you insist, I can check it," she cut him off, her eyes flashing in annoyance. "You'll do as you're told," she spat, "or this plane won't be taking off anytime soon." A second flight attendant stepped forward, eyes flicking from Olivia's rigid form to Charlie's stooped figure. She could sense the mood turning sour. But before she could intervene, Charlie gave an accommodating nod and said, "I'll hold the bag beneath my seat if you like." A faint glimmer of gratitude shone in the other attendant's expression. At least the passenger was being cooperative. Yet something within Olivia just wouldn't let it go. She had already made up her mind that this elderly traveller was a thorn in her side. Something about his calm demeanor rubbed her the wrong way, like he knew more than he was letting on, or was mocking her authority without a single word. Fueled by a wave of sudden anger, she grumbled a curt acknowledgement and turned away, each step harsh against the airplane's narrow aisle. Suddenly, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing an unexpected mechanical check. The flight would be delayed. Groans and sighs coursed through the cabin as passengers settled in for an unknown wait. Olivia didn't relish the idea of being stuck with these travelers any longer than necessary. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, tension escalated. People clamored for water, for updates, for the restroom. Some threatened to deplane. Others were on the verge of missing connecting flights. Charlie quietly stayed in his seat, reading a worn paperback novel. He seemed oddly content, despite the intensifying commotion. Unbeknownst to Olivia and most everyone else, Charlie was more used to waiting than any of them could possibly imagine. When you're a United States senator, especially one seasoned in the chess game of politics, patience becomes second nature. By the time the pilot announced they'd be ready for takeoff in another 15 minutes, Olivia was exhausted. She performed another pass through the cabin, distributing water cups, when she caught a glimpse of Charlie with his reading light on. In her fatigued and irritable state, the small overhead lamp seemed annoyingly bright. She marched up to him, bristling. "Sir, would you mind turning that off during taxiing? We want to make sure we're ready for takeoff." Charlie gave her a polite smile. "Certainly. I didn't realize we were about to move." His calm, collected tone only fanned the flames of her irritation. Something about him felt condescending in her mind, though he'd done nothing to convey such arrogance. Moments later, the plane finally pushed back from the gate. A communal sigh of relief swept the cabin. Olivia strapped herself in for the flight attendant's takeoff procedure, glancing at Charlie one last time. He was the picture of serenity, as though he wasn't at all bothered by the long wait or her sharp words. Rebellious thoughts swirled in her head. Who does this man think he is, acting so unaffected? Does he think he's above the rules? As the Boeing 737-800 thundered into the storm-clouded sky, lightning flashed in the distance. The climb was turbulent, a roller coaster of dips and jolts that had the passengers gripping their armrests. Through it all, Charlie stared out the window, his book tucked neatly away. Olivia's colleague, noticing her taut shoulders, whispered, "Are you okay? That passenger earlier, he doesn't seem to be any trouble." Olivia pursed her lips. "We'll see," she muttered. Half an hour into the flight, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Olivia jumped to her feet, beginning her beverage service. She started from the front, working her way down. When she got to Charlie, she noticed he'd taken out a battered manila folder stuffed with documents stamped with official seals, classified, confidential, Senate judiciary, and more. Olivia's eyes bulged. She didn't have time to read them in detail, but she recognized official government letterheads. An uneasy feeling slithered into her stomach. This wasn't just any passenger, but pride and annoyance still coursed through her veins, and she wasn't about to back down now. "Sir, would you like a beverage?" she asked. Her voice clipped. Charlie looked up, gave a small nod, and asked for a cup of black coffee. As she poured the coffee from the carafe into the flimsy plastic cup, her eyes lingered on the official documents. She watched him slip them back into the folder with a slight air of caution. One word kept catching her eye: Senate. Her mind churned through possibilities. A lawyer, a government aide? Certainly not a senator, not with such a low profile, not traveling alone. That'd be too absurd. She dismissed the thought and handed him his coffee. "Here you go," she said mechanically. As she moved on, she couldn't resist one last glance over her shoulder. He was sipping the coffee, eyes returned to the folder, unperturbed by anything around him. Something in that calmness unnerved her more than any complaint or outburst would have. Throughout the flight, turbulence reared its head occasionally, shaking the cabin and causing overhead compartments to rattle. Olivia struggled to maintain composure as she served drinks and pretzels, but her agitation with Charlie, bordering on irrational fixation, was rising to a dangerous boil. She found herself sneaking suspicious glances, trying to catch him in any wrongdoing. Yet all he did was quietly peruse his documents, occasionally jotting notes with a silver pen etched with a small American flag insignia. 2 hours into the flight, the cabin lights dimmed. Most passengers dozed or watched in-flight movies. Thunder boomed outside, the storm intensifying. Olivia's nerves, already frazzled, felt like they were on the brink of snapping. She made her way back up the aisle, checking overhead bins, ensuring seatbelts were fastened. When she reached Charlie, she noticed he had a small flashlight on an approved personal device for reading in the dark. Without warning, the plane lurched violently, sending a jolt through everyone's spine. Olivia, caught off guard, nearly lost her balance, stumbling into Charlie's shoulder. Coffee from a nearby passenger's cup splashed onto the floor. Embarrassed, Olivia regained her footing. Charlie politely asked, "Are you all right?" She glared at him as though it were his fault, hissing, "Watch what you're doing." He opened his mouth to speak, but she stormed off before he could respond. The flight had turned into a stressful ordeal for everyone, including Charlie. He dealt with filibusters, heated debates on the Senate floor, and endless media scrutiny. Yet the intangible hostility coming from this attendant set his teeth on edge. In his life, he had learned to remain calm under duress, but everyone has their limit. Finally, about 3.5 hours into the flight, Olivia's temper erupted like a dormant volcano awakened by an earthquake. She was collecting trash when she noticed that Charlie had momentarily stood up to stretch his legs. He'd placed his bag in the aisle for a second, carefully ensuring it wouldn't trip anyone. Olivia seized on this with righteous fury. Approaching him with a scowl, she barked, "Sit down immediately or face the consequences." Her voice echoed in the cabin, drawing every gaze. Charlie tried to calmly explain he was just easing a cramp in his leg, but she wasn't listening. In a dramatic motion, she snatched up his bag and shoved it onto the seat. "You think you can break rules because you've got your fancy documents?" she spat, voice quivering with indignation. "Who do you think you are?" Charlie's eyebrows furrowed, and a flicker of exasperation crossed his features. "Madam, I advise you to calm down." That was all it took. In her heightened state, Olivia's anger erupted. She raised her hand and, in a split second of blind frustration, slapped him across the face. The sound reverberated through the stunned cabin. Passengers gasped, some leaping from their seats to intervene, while others fumbled for their phones to record the chaos. Charlie staggered back, his cheeks stinging, eyes wide in disbelief. At that moment, the second flight attendant rushed over, horror etched into every line of her face. "Olivia!" she screamed. "What are you doing?" But the horrifying deed was done. Almost immediately, the entire flight crew scrambled into action. Passengers stood, outraged at the unprofessional behavior. Some demanded an explanation, others called for the pilot. Olivia, realizing the gravity of her action, let out a shaky breath. She saw the pure shock in Charlie's eyes. He looked at her, not with vengeful fury, but with a pained, profound disappointment. It was as though she had violated some unspoken trust. In the next breath, Charlie withdrew a small wallet from his inside pocket. There, glinting under the cabin's subdued lights, was his official senatorial ID. Charles Tremblay, senior senator from the state of Delaware. The hush that fell over the cabin felt almost supernatural, more suffocating than the turbulence that rattled the plane's structure. Olivia's heart plummeted. She'd just assaulted a sitting USS senator. 9. Lightning strikes twice panic. Absolute unfettered panic. Olivia's fellow flight attendant stared at the ID, her mouth hanging open. The pilot, alerted by the uproar, rushed out of the cockpit, ordering everyone to remain seated. The plane rocked again, as if the storm outside decided to mirror the storm raging within. Over the intercom, a frantic announcement asked for everyone's cooperation in maintaining safety. But the chaos in the cabin was spiraling. Charlie inhaled slowly, collecting himself with the poise of a seasoned politician. He could have immediately demanded Olivia's arrest. He could have threatened the airline with lawsuits. But he stayed silent for a long, tense moment, measuring his words. His silence felt more terrifying than any outburst could have been. Passengers erupted into speculation and murmur. "He's a senator? She's done for. What's going to happen?" Cameras recorded every second, capturing Olivia's stricken expression, Charlie's reddened cheek, and the swirl of flight attendants trying to manage the crisis. Outside, thunder boomed, rattling the windows as if nature itself was outraged by what had happened. Gradually, as minutes ticked by, the stunned hush gave way to frantic whispers. Some passengers recognized Charlie's name. He was reputed to be a quiet, no-nonsense senator who had dedicated decades to public service. Rumors circulated that he had been working on a critical piece of legislation to reform certain airline regulations, ironically enough. A few of the more excitable passengers even speculated that Olivia was an industry plant, orchestrating an attack to sabotage the senator's mission. Conspiracy theories, as bizarre as they were entertaining, flooded the press of onlookers. Meanwhile, Charlie, nursing his smarting cheek, signaled for calm. With the tact of a skilled diplomat, he urged the pilot to keep the flight on schedule. "I will address this matter once we land," he said. His voice, measured but with an undercurrent of authority, subdued the rising tide of hysteria. However, it was clear that Olivia's fate hung in the balance. In the cockpit, the pilot and co-pilot exchanged panicked looks. Protocol demanded that they report such an incident, but they also knew the potential ramifications of assaulting a USS senator. The airline's legal team would be in meltdown mode. Furious calls to the ground staff began, a flurry of instructions and disclaimers being exchanged. In the thick of it, Charlie requested a private word with the flight's pilot and Olivia, if possible. The pilot hesitated. The storm still battered the plane, creating pockets of moderate to severe turbulence. Still, given the gravity of the situation, he found a moment to invite Charlie and a very reluctant Olivia to the galley, away from the prying ears and eyes of the other passengers. There, in a cramped space filled with metallic storage carts, rattling coffee pots, and flickering fluorescent lights, Charlie Tremblay looked Olivia in the eye. His voice was calm but unyielding. "I want to know why," he said. "Why would you strike someone you've never met for a reason that seems to hinge on your personal frustration?" Olivia's shoulders trembled. She tried to speak, but the words stuck. Days of stress, personal issues at home, the mounting pressure from her job, and her inability to control her temper all congealed into a single catastrophic moment. Tears prickled her eyes. I'm sorry," she managed, her voice choked. "I wasn't thinking. I shouldn't have." Charlie held up a hand. "Do you have any idea of the magnitude of what you've done?" She shook her head helplessly. The pilot stood by, looking grim. Outside the galley door, the rest of the crew and passengers waited, electricity crackling in the air from the tension. The senator continued quietly. An apology alone might not suffice. Olivia's face paled, fully grasping that this could destroy her career and perhaps lead to criminal charges. But Charlie took a slow breath, as though weighing something heavy. "Let's land safely first. Then we'll talk about accountability." The remaining 3 hours of the flight passed in excruciating limbo. Word of the incident had spread throughout the cabin like wildfire. stoking a mixture of sympathy and condemnation. Some passengers were outraged at Olivia's behavior. Others whispered that no single meltdown could define a person's entire life. During this period, Charlie made no more demands. He returned to his seat, quietly reading his documents, though the faint bruising on his cheek was a haunting reminder of the tension that still loomed. Olivia tried to keep performing her duties, but her hands trembled each time she handed out a drink or collected trash. The second flight attendant and a few concerned passengers offered her gentle words, but it did little to soothe the cold dread pooling in the pit of her stomach. Finally, the wheels touched down at Los Angeles International Airport with a jolt. Even as the plane taxied to the gate, the cabin buzzed with restless energy. Everyone awaited the next act of this real-life drama. Police officers and airline officials gathered at the end of the jet bridge, informed that a serious incident had occurred mid-flight. Cameras from the local press, tipped off by social media posts from passengers, crowded near the terminal windows. It felt like stepping onto a movie set with no script. When the door opened, Charlie Tremblay was the first to deplane, accompanied by the flight's captain. Olivia lingered, heart thudding so loudly she could barely hear. Would she be arrested on the spot? Was her life, as she knew it, over? She swallowed hard and stepped out of the aircraft, half expecting to be met with handcuffs. But instead of immediate arrest, she was led by airport security to a small conference room in the terminal. There, airline lawyers, airport officials, and a stoic Charlie Tremblay waited. The hush in the room was staggering. Olivia could practically feel the weight of the cameras and curious onlookers behind the closed door. One of the lawyers began, "Senator Tremblay, we are prepared to press charges on your behalf. We can also proceed with immediate punitive measures against Miss Masters, including termination of employment." His tone was matter-of-fact but tinted with caution. Nobody wanted to anger a senator. Charlie fixed his gaze on Olivia. "I want to hear from you," he said gently. "Explain yourself." At first, words failed her. Slowly, she recounted her personal struggles, her mother's illness, her crippling debt, the fear of losing her job due to past cutbacks, the anxiety over an impending storm. None of it justified violence, and she said so repeatedly. She offered no excuses, just raw honesty. I snapped. "I lost control. I'll face the consequences." Everyone in the room looked to Charlie. His reputation for fairness and empathy clashed with the magnitude of the assault he'd endured. In the pregnant pause, one of the lawyers reached for a pen, ready to start drafting legal documents. Charlie exhaled quietly, glancing at the stack of statements and legal forms. Then he spoke in a measured tone. "While I could press charges, it's clear that Miss Masters acted impulsively. She has apologized, though the apology doesn't erase the wrongdoing." His gaze flicked to the airline officials. "What I want is an official record of her behavior, but I also want to give her a chance to redeem herself. She made a dreadful mistake, and one that must not be repeated." A ripple of surprise coursed through the room. The lawyers exchanged glances. The airline representative cleared his throat. "Sir, she physically assaulted you. This is a serious criminal matter. We're willing to terminate her immediately." The senator nodded solemnly. "I'm aware. But as someone who has fought for second chances for non-violent offenders, I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't allow some measure of reconciliation here. I'm not saying she should face no punishment. I'm suggesting a path that acknowledges the severity of her crime while allowing for the possibility of atonement." Olivia's tear-stained face lifted slightly. She had been prepared for the worst. That Charlie Tremblay was even considering leniency was astonishing. Still, she read the subtext in his eyes. This isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card. You will be held accountable. But it wasn't the death knell she'd anticipated. Word of the senator's decision circulated quickly. Some praised him as merciful, others condemned him as too soft. Meanwhile, the airline's management faced a predicament. They knew the public demanded accountability, especially after viral footage of Olivia's slap began circulating online. On the other hand, dismissing her outright when the victim himself was seeking a constructive resolution might be seen as tone deaf. Ultimately, they decided to suspend Olivia without pay, pending a formal review. Criminal charges remained a possibility if the senator pursued them. In the days that followed, Olivia's life turned upside down. Media outlets camped outside her apartment building, hurling invasive questions whenever she stepped outside. She felt the crushing weight of public scorn, with her face plastered on news bulletins. Flight attendant assaults senator in mid-air meltdown. Comments on social media were brutal and often personal. She was branded everything from unhinged to unpatriotic. In the quiet hours of the night, she found herself replaying that moment in her mind, over and over, wishing she could take it back. One afternoon, Olivia received a call from an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something compelled her to pick up. It was Senator Tremblay's staffer, asking if she would be willing to meet with the senator privately. Confusion warred with trepidation, but she agreed, if only out of curiosity and a lingering sense of guilt. The following day, she arrived at an understated office building in downtown Los Angeles. Inside, behind a modest oak desk, sat Charles Tremblay, the bruise on his cheek now faint. He offered her a seat with a reserved nod. She noticed thick stacks of documents, some referencing proposed airline industry reforms. "I understand you've been suspended," Charlie began, folding his hands. "I also understand you're dealing with personal hardships." Olivia nodded, her throat tight. "Yes, sir." He spoke calmly, but with a seriousness that made her palms clammy. "What you did was unacceptable, but I've spent my career championing fair labor practices and second chances for people who make mistakes. I want you to do something for me, and for yourself. I want you to share your story." Olivia blinked in confusion. "Share my story, sir?" Charlie nodded. "With my colleagues, or perhaps in a public forum. I'm pushing legislation to improve working conditions for flight attendants, better support for mental health, fewer hours on back-to-back shifts, among other things. Your experience, painful as it is, could shed light on the stresses flight crew members face every day." She sat in stunned silence. She had never imagined the possibility of turning her greatest shame into something productive. I'd be willing to try," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But her eyes held a spark of renewed determination. News of the senator's unusual approach spread quickly. Major outlets labeled it an unprecedented act of clemency and a surprising collaboration between victim and perpetrator. Headlines ranged from sensational to supportive. Some cynics accused Charlie of exploiting the situation to garner sympathy for his legislation, while others lauded him for demonstrating true leadership and empathy. Despite the swirl of media speculation, Charlie and Olivia began organizing a small roundtable event, inviting labor advocates, airline representatives, and a handful of press members. The aim: to address the extreme pressures flight crews face and how that environment can push someone to the brink. Olivia would recount her ordeal, not as an excuse, but as a wake-up call. Behind closed doors, airline lobbyists seethed. They didn't appreciate the negative spotlight on working conditions and scheduling practices. They whispered about sabotaging the senator's efforts or digging up dirt to discredit him. The tension surrounding the upcoming roundtable was so thick it could be cut with a knife. As the date of the roundtable neared, Olivia found herself the target of ominous phone calls and internet harassment. "Keep your mouth shut," warned one anonymous message. "You think a senator can protect you from everything?" Her fear surged anew, reminiscent of the media vultures outside her apartment. She brought these threats to Senator Tremblay's attention. He responded by increasing security around both of them, a grim expression hinting he suspected powerful airline interests could be pulling the strings. Yet the senator pressed on, determined to hold the event. He privately reassured Olivia, no bully corporate or otherwise is going to stop this conversation. Though his gentle smile offered comfort, Olivia couldn't help but feel she was stepping into waters far deeper than she'd ever anticipated. The round table took place in a modest conference room at a local community college chosen to emphasize accessibility and education over political pomp. Charlie arrived in a simple suit, greeting attendees personally. Representatives from flight attendant unions, pilot associations, passenger advocacy groups, and even mental health professionals gathered. Cameras rolled from various news outlets, capturing each moment. When Olivia entered, a hush fell. This was the woman who had slapped a U.S. senator, a symbol of the flawed system they were all here to address. Her steps were measured, her eyes reflecting a mix of regret and determination. Charlie introduced her. "We all know how we got here," he began, voice steady as he recounted the mid-flight altercation. But while the slap made headlines, it overshadowed a larger issue: the strain flight staff endured day after day, and the lack of institutional support to handle that strain. Olivia inhaled shakily, then spoke. Her words tumbled out with raw emotion as she described the relentless schedule, minimal rest, personal crises overshadowed by job demands, and the emotional toll that fateful flight exacted. She looked the audience in the eye, accepting responsibility for her actions, but also shining a light on how the system had contributed to her state of mind. Midway through the event, a sudden commotion at the back of the room drew everyone's attention. A group of hecklers barged in, shouting accusations that Olivia was lying, that her mental health claims were fabricated, and that the senator was orchestrating a publicity stunt. They waved printed articles hinting at some dubious past of Olivia's, referencing minor infractions she'd had in her early 20s. Cameras swiveled to capture the chaos. For a moment, Olivia froze. The humiliating details about her life, unpaid parking tickets, a short stint at a collection agency, even an unflattering photo from a college party were shouted aloud. She felt her cheeks burn as the small crowd of disruptors spewed vitriol, but Charlie stepped forward, demanding respect and order. A calm but unwavering voice cut through the uproar. "We're here for a constructive dialogue," the senator stated, "not character assassination. If you have a genuine concern, voice it respectfully. Otherwise, kindly leave." Security swiftly escorted the intruders out, yet Olivia felt the familiar weight of shame. It was a painful reminder that the path to redemption often faced obstacles planted by those who profited from the status quo. Despite the interruption, the round table continued. Labor advocates testified about flight attendants forced to endure back-to-back red-eye flights, minimal layover rest, and inadequate mental health support. Psychologists elaborated on the cumulative stress that could lead to sudden, extreme outbursts if left unaddressed. Meanwhile, airline representatives tried to paint a more forgiving picture, insisting they were doing all they could within financial constraints. The tension in the room was palpable. Charlie found an opening. He revealed that he had introduced a bill called the Airline Crew Support and Wellness Act. Real documentation was presented bearing the official letterhead of the U.S. Senate. It detailed mandatory break periods, counseling services, improved healthcare coverage, and stricter enforcement of passenger behavior guidelines. Everyone, from flight attendants to union leaders, listened with rapt attention. The press snapped photos of the official text, already labeling the moment a potential turning point in aviation labor. Olivia observed quietly, awe creeping into her features. She had never imagined that her biggest mistake could propel change at such a high level. Emotions welled up, a blend of gratitude and disbelief. Just as the event drew toward its concluding remarks, a startling development transpired outside. Someone had called in a phony security threat against the venue, leading to the sudden blare of alarms. Attendees were asked to evacuate. Panic rippled through the crowd. Charlie and Olivia were rushed toward a side exit by security personnel. Press members scattered in confusion, some live streaming the chaos. Even amid the swirling madness, Charlie kept his composure. He recognized sabotage when he saw it, another attempt to derail the meaningful conversation. As they reached the parking lot, he leaned toward Olivia, voice low. "Don't let fear silence you. This is too important to abandon." Although her heart hammered, Olivia nodded. She understood, now more than ever, that she was part of something bigger. The karma of her impulsive action had led her down a path of unexpected advocacy. In the following weeks, as news of the roundtable and attempted sabotage spread, the public conversation shifted. Support for flight crews gained momentum. Journalists dug into the grueling schedules imposed by certain airlines, uncovering horror stories of near misses caused by overworked staff. The conversation that had begun with a scandalous slap turned into a national debate on airline safety and workers' rights. Simultaneously, the heat turned up on corporate lobbyists. Anonymous insiders leaked memos showing behind-the-scenes attempts to undermine the new legislation. The question of who orchestrated the disruptions at the roundtable lingered. Suspicions pointed to well-funded groups with a vested interest in maintaining cheap labor and minimal regulation. Through it all, Charlie kept Olivia updated, sometimes inviting her to closed-door sessions with his staff as they refined the bill. She remained suspended from her job, and the airline had yet to make a final ruling on her future employment. Legal charges still loomed as a theoretical possibility, dependent on the senator's final word. Yet, Charlie refrained from pulling that lever, choosing instead to let her actions speak to whether she deserved forgiveness. The day the Airline Crew Support and Wellness Act was set for its preliminary hearing before the Senate committee arrived with bated anticipation. Olivia found herself on the steps of the Capitol, having traveled to Washington, D.C. at Charlie's invitation. She was slated to testify about her experiences, a move that could either sink or solidify the bill's credibility. Nerves consumed her as she walked through the grand hallways, the marble floors gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Distinguished senators, some of whom she recognized from televised hearings, milled about. At one point, she caught sight of a senator, known for vehemently opposing new labor regulations. He glared at her from across the corridor, a silent but pointed rebuke. Inside the hearing room, cameras flashed, and hushed conversation filled the air. Charlie gave her a nod of encouragement from the dais. Taking her seat before the microphone, Olivia felt the weight of national scrutiny upon her shoulders. She began hesitantly, voice shaking, but soon found her footing. She described the relentless demands of her job, the emotional toll, and how a lapse of judgment led her to harm someone she respected. She expressed regret, acknowledging she wasn't proud of that moment, but she also painted a vivid picture of an industry stretched thin, leaving workers vulnerable and exhausted. By the time she finished, the room was silent. Even the senator who had glared at her seemed momentarily contemplative. Just as Olivia concluded her testimony, a staffer rushed up to Charlie with urgent news. A scandal had erupted involving one of the major airlines. A leaked document revealed deliberate cost-cutting measures that endangered crew rest, pointing to a near-catastrophic in-flight fatigue incident weeks prior. Reporters swarmed the halls, bombarding everyone with questions. In a flash, the hearing devolved into a flurry of side conversations and camera flashes. The senator who opposed the bill demanded an immediate recess to address the shocking revelations. Some on the committee insisted the new evidence validated the need for Charlie's legislation. The swirl of reaction was as powerful as any storm in the sky. In that whirlwind, Olivia felt a sense of surreal detachment. The entire chain of events, from that disastrous slap to her standing in the Capitol, had transformed her life beyond recognition. She realized she had become a key witness to a broader injustice. Within hours, news outlets broadcasted the hearing highlights nationwide. Clips of Olivia's heartfelt testimony went viral on social media. Discussions about worker exploitation, mental health, and corporate responsibility dominated talk shows. Hashtags calling for #CrewWellness now flooded Twitter. As momentum built, key senators who had remained neutral or quietly opposed the bill began to sway. Public pressure mounted, and the potential political fallout of ignoring such glaring safety concerns became too risky. The Airline Crew Support and Wellness Act advanced further than anyone had expected just a few weeks prior. Through it all, Olivia stayed in D.C. with the senator's help. He arranged for her to meet mental health counselors and union leaders who expressed gratitude for her speaking out. Still, the specter of her own wrongdoing never left her thoughts. She knew she couldn't undo the harm she'd caused Charlie, but she vowed to pay it forward by helping others before frustration and stress drove them to similar acts of desperation. One late evening, as Olivia rested in a modest hotel room near Capitol Hill, her phone buzzed. Another anonymous text message: "Back off. Enough is enough. You don't belong here." Her heart pounded. She feared for her safety once more, uncertain who was behind these threats. She immediately alerted Charlie, who was equally concerned. They arranged an overnight detail of Capitol police officers around her hotel. Anxiety gnawed at her. Were corporate interests so threatened by the bill that they'd stoop to harassing a single former flight attendant? The notion left her both fearful and angry. Charlie's staff quietly investigated. Their inquiries led to the identification of a shadowy PR firm rumored to manage clandestine smear campaigns. No direct link was confirmed, but the circumstantial evidence pointed to certain airline lobbyists desperate to squash the legislation before it could gain further traction. Amid the swirling chaos, a vote on the bill was scheduled before a key Senate committee. On that day, Charlie rose early, reviewing last-minute revisions and statements of support from union representatives. Olivia accompanied him, though only as a spectator this time. She stood in the gallery, a nervous knot in her stomach, watching the debate unfold. Some senators argued about fiscal burdens on airlines. Others cited public safety and the moral imperative to protect workers. Tensions flared, alliances shifted, deals were whispered in back corridors. After hours of impassioned speeches, the committee cast their votes. By the thinnest of margins, the bill advanced out of committee, a crucial step toward a full Senate vote. Exhausted relief washed over Olivia. She locked eyes with Charlie across the chamber. He gave her a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement that her harrowing journey had contributed to this milestone. Yet, she also knew the fight wasn't over. Legislation of this scope could languish for months or even years before reaching the president's desk. Just when it seemed the drama might finally subside, an astonishing confession emerged from one of the individuals who had disrupted the roundtable, a former airline employee turned hired protester. Under pressure from legal threats and public scrutiny, he went on record stating he was paid by a lobby group to disrupt Charlie's event and discredit Olivia. He also confessed that the false security threat at the conference venue was orchestrated to stop the roundtable from shedding too much light on the bill's necessity. The revelation sent shockwaves through the media. With the public's ire now directed at airline lobbyists, sponsors dropped them, and certain executives quietly resigned. Olivia watched in awe as the karmic retribution she never dared to hope for unfurled. Those who tried to suppress the truth were themselves now under intense legal and social fire. In the aftermath, the momentum behind the Airline Crew Support and Wellness Act surged again. Lawmakers who once sat on the fence found themselves championing the bill in response to public outcry over the underhanded lobbying tactics. Hearing after hearing, the conversation persisted, with flight attendants nationwide sharing their personal stories of burnout and exhaustion. Meanwhile, Olivia received word from her airline's top management. Her suspension hearing was scheduled. She prepared herself for the worst, though a part of her dared to hope for leniency given the senator's stance and the wave of support. On the day of the hearing, she stepped into a sterile corporate boardroom, facing a panel of executives. They grilled her about the flight incident, her mental state, and the details of her involvement with Senator Tremblay. After what felt like an eternity, the panel announced their decision. She would remain terminated as a flight attendant for violating the airline's code of conduct. However, in light of her role in highlighting the need for reform, they offered her a position in ground administration, effectively a second chance at employment, but never again in the skies. Olivia accepted, tears stinging her eyes. It wasn't the perfect outcome. Her dream of traveling and working among the clouds was over, but it was still a chance to rebuild her life. She felt the sting of regret, but also the solace of moving forward without legal charges hanging over her head. As the final chapters of the legislative battle played out, Charlie worked tirelessly to gather enough support for a vote on the Senate floor. He gave impassioned speeches, citing the numerous testimonies of flight attendants, pilots, and even concerned passengers. The storyline of the slap that sparked a movement had gripped the nation. Late-night talk show hosts lampooned both Olivia and Charlie, but the comedic jabs only broadened the conversation, keeping it in the public eye. Opposing forces didn't relent easily. They lobbied furiously to water down provisions, focusing on cost concerns and the potential for increased airfare. Yet public sentiment remained strongly in favor of comprehensive protections, pressuring reluctant senators to compromise. Over months of negotiation, the final language of the bill emerged: a robust framework mandating better scheduling practices, mental health resources, mandatory rest periods, and stricter oversight on passenger misconduct. At last, the day of the Senate floor vote arrived. Olivia watched from her new office's break room, her eyes glued to the live coverage. Charlie rose to speak, summarizing the bill's journey, from the impetus of a tragic and unacceptable in-flight assault to the wider conversation it ignited. He thanked all the staffers, union leaders, passengers, and yes, even the flight attendant whose grave mistake fueled these reforms. The roll call vote began. The scoreboard toggled between yay and nay. Heart-pounding, Olivia counted each name, and then, in a remarkable victory, the act passed with a clear majority. Celebrations erupted across social media and in flight crew lounges around the country. Airline managements released statements promising to comply with the new federal requirements. Some swore to implement changes immediately, pledging a renewed commitment to employee welfare. Others grumbled but accepted the inevitable. Amid the jubilation, a final twist of karmic retribution landed on Olivia's doorstep. The airline that had fired her found itself under close scrutiny by newly empowered inspectors. Serious infractions were uncovered: chronic understaffing, improper rest logs, and even attempts to sidestep certain FAA regulations. Fines were levied, public relations took a hit, and top executives braced for possible resignations. Olivia couldn't help but see the cosmic irony. The very institution that had so harshly punished her was now forced to confront its own culpability. Though she never wished ill upon anyone, she felt a strange sense of balance in the unfolding events. Several months passed, bringing a degree of normalcy back into Olivia's life. She transitioned into her ground administration role, focusing on coordinating better staff scheduling and advocating for mental health programs, a direct outcome of the new legislation. Though she sometimes missed the thrill of working in flight, she found purpose in ensuring that no other attendants would suffer the conditions that once pushed her over the edge. Charlie Tremblay continued his work in the Senate, a quiet force for accountability and compassion. He and Olivia remained in occasional contact, exchanging updates on how the new regulations were being enforced. Their relationship, born of conflict, had evolved into a mutual respect, a living testament that even the worst moments could lead to positive change. One crisp morning, Olivia opened her work email to find a message from Charlie's office. He was heading a new committee to monitor the bill's implementation and wanted her to serve as an advisor. The prospect both thrilled and terrified her. She was no policy expert, but the invitation made sense. Her story had been the catalyst, and her insights could guide effective enforcement. After some thought, she accepted. Within weeks, she found herself traveling to Capitol Hill again, though this time, not as a defendant or a scapegoat, but as a contributor to meaningful oversight. As she settled into her new role, a sense of gratitude filled her. She recognized the extraordinary second chance she'd been given, a chance to turn her biggest mistake into a powerful legacy. In the grand tapestry of events that had unfolded since that fateful flight, Olivia saw how every action carried weight. Her slap, an act of violence born from stress and poor judgment, had rippled out, changing not just her life, but countless others. The negative turned to positive through the crucible of consequence and accountability. For Senator Charles Tremblay, he had received his own karmic lesson to remain vigilant and compassionate even when personally wronged. The flight attendant's momentary aggression could have hardened him, but instead, it prompted him to champion reform that might otherwise have never seen the light of day. In doing so, he cemented his reputation as a leader who could transform conflict into progress. Years later, when historians and political observers looked back on the passage of the Airline Crew Support and Wellness Act, they often pointed to the shocking spark that started it all, the viral incident of a flight attendant slapping a U.S. senator. Documentaries and news specials recounted the improbable journey from violence to advocacy, weaving Olivia's personal struggles with Charlie's tireless legislative work. The story became a testament to the unpredictability of human events and the possibility of redemption. Olivia, now seasoned in policy work and far removed from her days of scanning boarding passes, occasionally reflected on the surreal path her life had taken. She carried the memory of that slap not as a badge of shame, but as a reminder of the transformative power of accountability, empathy, and second chances. In the end, everyone involved felt the gravitational force of karmic retribution for those who tried to sabotage the effort, scandal and repercussions for those who strove for reform, vindication, and progress. The old man who was far more than he seemed, and the flight attendant whose single lapse of control changed the course of aviation history, remained forever linked by the echoes of a moment that no one on that flight would ever forget. And so, dear viewers, we end our harrowing journey through betrayal, reflection, and ultimately redemption. What began with a single impulsive act ignited a national conversation, exposing injustices and forging unlikely alliances. Our story reminds us that a dark moment need not define a person forever. We each possess the power to choose growth, transforming conflict into a catalyst for meaningful change. If you found this tale of high-stakes drama and karmic retribution compelling, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Your support fuels the stories we bring to life.